Welcome back. Everyone that was ever a baby or a toddler should be here, shouldn't they?
Yeah.
And we may not have children, or maybe they're grown, but we may have grandchildren. And if we don't have children or grandchildren, we may have nieces, nephews, etc., etc., etc. I remember I went to my niece's wedding recently. It's my nephew's wedding, but my niece was there with her little toddler and her new baby. And I'd put something together for this little toddler. I had a little tiny container, and I had a little stone, I had a little stick, I had a tiny little monkey, and I had a little dog, and I had 2 gum nuts. You know, children love little things. And this little boy is 3, and it was in a little container. And, you know, they were dressing him up all fancy because he was going to be the page boy. And when I got there, he said, "Hello, Auntie." And I said, "I have a little present for you." And I gave it to him, he opened it, he said, "This is what I've always wanted." Just little tiny things. And when I was at Misty Mountain, we've got a creek, and I'm often picking up little tiny stones. I used to do the live blood analysis, and you got this little tiny hard plastic box, and I put all the little stones in there, some red ones, some white ones. And all my grandchildren have received a little box of stones from half my children. I'm grandma, the other half I'm nana. My son rang me up, I think his little boy was 4, he said, "Mum, we've bought him a remote control car and all he wants to do is play with your rocks." Do you know, they love those little things. And a lady said to me one day, "You must spoil your grandchildren." And I just smiled at her because I knew she wouldn't like my answer. She asked me again, "You must spoil your grandchildren." I said, "No." What does spoil mean? Ruin something beautiful. But I also know that my grandchildren love coming to my place. And we weed the garden together, and we make apple pies together, and we scrub the shower together. Do you know that's what they love? And when my 2 little ones, let's see, Sophia was maybe 5, Lennox was 3, they used to love having tea parties every afternoon. And they would, and I've taught them which herbs are which, so they go and pick the peppermint. Now, when Lennox was first picking it, sometimes we had some other leaves in there as well. And then we had little tea parties, and little Sophia, she spreads out the mat. You know, little girls are such little mothers. And she'd put a nice cloth on the ground, and she had vases of flowers and all these lovely little things. So just let her do it all. And she sees me making herbal tinctures and things, so she gathers all the lavender, all the little lavender flowers, and she's got one little container with the little bits of lavender. She's got another container which got the lavender in the water. She's got all these little tiny bits and pieces. Oh, and she's so happy. Can you see what they're doing? They're doing it themselves. So as much as possible, you let them do it themselves. But there's always guidelines in the home. So when I had my grandchildren, and let's say Mark was probably 4, the next one was probably 6, and the next one was probably 9, and they would stay with me in holidays. And we always have breakfast in the morning, and they love millet porridge. And I get up early, so I can always cook it in the morning while I'm doing my exercise. And millet, what you've got to remember, it takes 4 cups of water to 1 cup of millet. Because when you have rice or when you have oats, it's usually 2 to 1, but not millet. And if you don't put enough water with millet, it's quite hard. But if you put enough water in, it comes very soft. And so I always get the children to set the table. Children love to help, and they love to help from a young age. And so, of course, you do what is appropriate for them. So little Lennox, he can put the serviettes out. You call it napkins. Now, the serviettes aren't put very neatly, but you see, that's how it all starts. And then he comes and you say, how many people? And you count the people. How many forks? How many knives? Now, I'm used to having my eyes on a lot of children. And so I'm constantly directing them. And then the oil container. So I said to the little one, if you're very careful, you can put the oil container on the table. Oh, they feel so big. You're letting them, they're carrying it like this, and then they put it up on the table and pours everywhere. But you know, that's fine, because what have they just learned? And they quickly look at me and I smile. I said, let's mop it up. And I get some paper towels and let them mop it up. And I said, see those paper towels that you've mopped the oil up with? If you put them in the fire tonight, when we light the fire, they'll light up. So you see, they're not getting into trouble because that was not naughty. That was just a little mistake, and they're just learning, and it also gives them confidence. And so everything's on the table. They've got the nuts, and we've got nuts in jars, but they can only carry one at a time. See, a lot of people don't let children do that because they might break them, or they might, but then you've got children that can't do anything. And when you don't let them do it, you know what you're saying to them? You're hopeless, you're stupid. You see that? You're saying, no, I'm trying to help them. Well, you're not helping them at all. Let them carry. So there are some things, like you wouldn't let the 3-year-old carry a big glass jar this big. So obviously there's, we have some common sense there. So the table's all set. So when my 3 grandsons, Mark was, say, 4, next one, Sonny's 6, and the next one is 8. I let them go to the table and chop the banana up. And that just gives me a bit of time because it takes them a long time to chop up a banana. Would you give them a knife? I would. I give them a knife. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but it's sharp enough to cut. Oh, they feel it's an honour because most children aren't allowed to have a knife, are they? But I was watching a documentary on babies, my daughter told me, and she said, Mum, look at this. And there's this 2-year-old with a machete cutting off the ends of the bananas. 2-year-old. Anyway, back to the kitchen and the dining room, and everything's getting ready, and they've got a bowl for the scraps, and they're chopping up their banana. And Michael comes in, so it's just a few minutes before we're eating, and little Marky put a piece of banana in his mouth. And Michael came in and said, hey, what are you doing? It's not time to eat. We haven't said grace. Mark looks like this. And of course, my response is, oh, Michael, he's just a little boy. It's just 2. But what must I not do? I must not. I think, you know what I do? I just turn around and finish doing what I'm doing. And then Michael says to and Mark's looking, and he says, stand over there. So Mark's standing like this, and of course, how do I feel? Oh, but I'm just doing in the table, and Mark looks at me, and you know what I do? I smile. You know what the smile says? It's okay, Mark. But my not interacting there, what does that also tell Mike? Mark, I'm supporting Michael. You're not supposed to eat, we haven't said grace yet. So Mark's over there, and we have everything together. Mark's like this. Anyway, Michael sits down, and then Michael looks over to Mark. You can come now. Mark quickly comes, and Mark always wants to sit next to me. And he's looking up at me, and he's like this, and I smile. Then Michael says grace, and then Michael says to the boys, you can eat now. And I just smile at Mark, and there we go. Mark's not going to do that anymore. Now, that's not the rules in his home, but that's the rules in our home. And it doesn't hurt them. He's not going to be mortified for life. But it just gives nice, clear guidelines. Is this what we do? Now, if Michael hadn't been there and I'd come and seen it, what would I say? I would say, Mark, we don't eat until we've said grace. And he probably would have said yes. But then you've got to help them. I said, just put the banana on you. Take it out and just put it on your plate. That'll be fine. That's how I probably would have handled it. But you know, everyone's not going to handle it the way you handle it. And whatever happens, you've got to work with that. It's far more important that my husband sees me support him. It's far more important that those little boys see that I support their pa than me rescue that little one, because it wasn't, he wasn't really, it wasn't a big thing. But can you see there are other things at stake? So what do we have for breakfast? Let's write down what we have for breakfast. We don't usually have a porridge, but the children love porridge. Always fruit. So notice they chopped up their banana, because it's very easy for children to chop up a banana, and they feel very accomplished that they cut up the banana. And sometimes the bits of banana are a little big, but doesn't matter. And then we have a porridge. So sometimes it's millet, sometimes it's rice. If you're not an early riser like me, you could put it in a slow cooker overnight. Sometimes it's oats, and sometimes I'll do quinoa. If I had a child who had eczema or asthma, we probably wouldn't do the oats. Oats are high in lectins, and if they're not prepared properly, that can increase inflammation. And then with that, they like a milk. So what would the milk be? Maybe organic soy. It might be coconut, might be almond. So there's a big selection that you can get of the milks today. And then on that we have chia seeds. So we eat a little bit different when the children are there, because Michael and I don't usually have a porridge. But the children like it. And I remember one day, and what they also like is putting sultanas, or you call them raisins, on top. So I say, would you like raisins? So they put the raisins out. Anyway, we live out in the country, and some ants had got into the raisins. And Mark said, oh, there's some ants in here. And I said, oh. And he put them on his meal and said, it's all right, Grandma, we'll just pretend they're chia seeds. Oh, well, if they want to eat ants, they can. It's a worse thing. But I loved his solution. We'll just pretend, anyway, it's the standard joke now. This was a few years ago. We still talk about Marky saying, we'll just pretend the ants are chia seeds. I did wash them and get the ants out after breakfast. And then they also have something that Michael and I always have, which is the sourdough toast. We have sourdough spelt. And on top of that we have avocado. I don't know whether that's an O or a avocado, and then lentils. Or we might have scrambled tofu. I'll just say tofu because it's scrambled is a big word. Or black-eyed beans. I think you call them peas. So Michael and I's breakfast, I'll have fruit, I'll have this, and then we have some nuts. That's a big breakfast. I'll tell you what, you don't hear from them for hours.
You serve all that?
Black-eyed.
Those are choices.
Well, see the ore? This is ore. These are ore too. I only cook one grain. I'm an early riser, so when I get up early, I'll put the millet on, I'll turn it really low. I'll put my black-eyed beans on, my lentils on, I'll turn it really low. Then I exercise. I always pray and have Bible study, run up and down hills. So I usually get up, say 5:30, and put this on and then do my prayer study, and then I walk at 6, get back in the kitchen at 6:30, and pull all this together. Rinse the lentils, put some oil, salt and herbs in them. Or rinse the black-eyed peas, put some oil, salt and herbs in it. So I'm not in the kitchen for a long time. And when the little boys are there, they're helping. They're putting the fruit on the table, they're setting the table. But if they aren't there, then I don't do all of that. I only do that because they like it. So you don't necessarily have to have all of that. It could, at this point, it could be a or. You might have this for breakfast, or you might have that for breakfast. So we only have all of that when the boys are there. But as I just explained, I'm not in the kitchen for a long time. I just put it on, bring it to the bowl, put it at low heat, and they're cooking. They're cooking while I'm running up and down hills, yeah?
Do you make your own sourdough spelt bread?
No, I don't, because I travel so much. But you can buy some very nice ones now. Oh, by the way, this is my daughter's website. She posted 200 books out yesterday. Because yesterday morning the books arrived, The Self-Heal by Design.
Oh, wow.
So we're just forgetting Amazon. They've already lost 20 boxes of my books. They were selling so much. Books that usually sell in 2 months were selling in 2 days. So Emma sent them 20 boxes, but they couldn't, seems like they couldn't deal with that. So they've put them in warehouses somewhere, and you can't talk to anyone in Amazon. All you can do is lodge a complaint. So my daughter's starting to employ a couple of people a week to deal with the orders for the books.
What's the name of the book?
Self-Heal by Design. And that's one of the reasons why we didn't have any books here is because of what someone's putting me up on TikTok and what's that other one? Anyway, so this Instagram. So the sales have just gone through the roof there. So anyway, but it's available now. So we usually we have these books printed in Minneapolis, and we usually do 2,000 a year. Well, so Michael ordered 4,000, and 2 weeks later he's ordered a print of 10,000 because it's just gone crazy. So we're sorry they're not available. We were unprepared for the onslaught. I don't know who puts it up on TikTok. Someone does. But this is excellent bread. If I lived in the US, this is what I'd eat. It's www.simple needs. And the guy that makes this bread, it's a sourdough bread. He uses our sourdough starter from Australia. And he's in dialogue with the Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, and what's the other one? Sprouts. So soon that bread will be available in all the stores. But you can order that. So that's the bread I'd probably use if I was here.
So he doesn't use the hybridized at all?
He doesn't use even spelt. He uses gluten-free. And it's the most beautiful gluten-free bread. I've never tasted it so nice. It'll keep weeks in the fridge. It'll go a bit hard, but you just toast it, and then it goes really soft. He developed this for his son. His son had major allergies. And he's a good friend of my daughter's. That's where he got the sourdough starter from. And that's why he first developed the bread. And when COVID hit, he made a small fortune because he was the only online bakery. But his competitors say to him, we don't know how you do it. They know what he puts in, but they don't know how he does it because it's such nice bread. And he will ship anywhere. What about my cookbook? All you have to do is, in fact, this lady just found it, didn't you?
Well, I only found it online, electronic. I didn't find the hard copy yet. I don't know where
So Misty Mountain Cookbook, just Google Misty Mountain Cookbook. Because I think you can download it. Something like that. I didn't want to be in the kitchen all day when my children were little. So I decided to feed them well. But to feed them well, all they have before breakfast is water. And then when you feed them well, they sit at the table. That's the rules of the home. They sit at the table. One lady said, "Look at your children, they just sit and eat." I said, "Well, they've had nothing before, and they know that if they leave the table, they can't come back. that's it. Dinner's over. There's no running here. They can go to the toilet. They can go get a tissue, blow their nose, but they can't go and play a game, then come back. You know, there's rules of the home. So I'll tell you what happened with Peter one day, because Peter's very fussy. If the spoon fell in the honey, he'd cry. If a banana, because he used to have his porridge and he liked his honey in the middle, and if a bit of banana fell in the honey, he'd cry. So, you know, so whenever he cried, he had to leave the room. And then he'd come back. And I remember one day, he had to leave about 4 or 5 times. Because every time he cries, he has to leave the room. That's the rule. I remember one day I was saying, well, put it like this, and I thought, go. Now, most of the children, when they were 2 or 3, that had happened a bit, but it was still happening when Peter was 5. So one day, and I think he was about 3 or 4, he hadn't had much to eat because there were so many dramas about what the banana did or what the milk did or where it didn't go right. And so he didn't get to eat a lot of food. So you know what I'm immediately thinking? I'm going to have trouble. He's going to be hungry in about an hour. So a couple of hours after the meal, he's hungry, so I give him water. So we have breakfast, say 7:30, so this is about 10 o'clock. I give him water. And that keeps him going for maybe till 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock, he's had water. So I say, all right, if you sit very still, you can have half a glass of soy milk or almond milk. So he has half a glass of almond or soy. And for a 3-year-old, that'll fill the hole a bit. Because I know that if I give him something to eat now, he's not going to want to eat lunch. And if he doesn't eat lunch, then he's going to want something mid-afternoon. So you go ahead. So that kept him going probably till 1. So the meal's in half an hour and he's really hungry. So I say, all right, if you sit very still on the chair, you can have a carrot. How long does it take him to eat a carrot? Long time. Because if I give him a sandwich or if I give him some nuts, right, that's too filling and he's not going to eat his meal. So you make it out it's a real honour to be able to eat this carrot. He can't run around and eat it. They can never do that. But he can sit on the chair. And every time I look at him, I smile. What does the smile say? Everything's all right. So by the time the meal comes, he's ready to eat his meal. He eats a good meal, and then what do I know now? I'm not going to have any trouble now for the rest of the day. And it's interesting, his little boy Lennox, so Lennox is 3, similar. So I've had a lot of experience with this. And so at my house, if it's half an hour for the meal, and I can tell because he starts to get a little bit naughty, he starts to get a little bit irritable, so I let him have an apple. And I give him a big apple. It takes a while for them to eat an apple. And he can sit and he can eat the apple. He can't run round and eat it. He can't play and eat it. He just eats the apple. And then at lunchtime, I give him the carrot. And he's very happily to eat that carrot. Because his mother actually said to me, he can have snacks between the meals. But I've never done it. And you give it to one child, and then what happens? All the other children want it. So, but I had them for 10 days and we managed very well by just doing that. So what's lunch? So this is breakfast. And it really makes easier parenting, whether you're an aunt or an uncle, a parent or a grandparent, if you feed them well. And if they can't leave the table, they're sitting there getting bored, so you know what they do when they get bored? They start to eat a bit more. So what's lunch? So lunch, we always start with a salad. And because children are more likely, say at breakfast, they're more likely to go to the toast, they're more likely to go to the oats rather than the fruit, we always start with the fruit. Same with lunch. So when I first became mother for Michael's children, we've been married 25 years. His daughter was 11 and his son was 13, and I know I've got to win these children. And because he was a single parent, They just lived on carbohydrates. In fact, his little daughter had a little bit of weight at that age. Do you know, within 1 month, she'd slimmed right down. Because they were just living, breakfast was always cereal and milk and toast and lots of pasta, because Michael doesn't cook. And his little daughter was doing all the cooking, and she'd be picking and lots of carbs. I came to the conclusions that children will live on bread if you let them. They'll live on pasta if you let them. So the first thing I used to do at breakfast was I always put a big fruit salad on the table when I was first mother. And there'd be seeds and nuts to sprinkle on top. And you'd see Michael and his children sit down and just see the fruit salad, and they're looking, is this it? And Michael would say, is there anything else? I said, oh, the millet's nearly ready. He's smart, smart. And when the fruit salad's half gone, oh, the millet's ready, here's the millet. Because they love the hot cereal. And I'd do the same thing at lunch. I'd put the salad on the table, there'd be nice dressings, and the salad must snap, must be crunchy. I never put dressing on the salad because it goes slimy. And the lettuce all goes limp, and then you can't use it the next day. So I always just did the salad, because if it's not all eaten, it's still crisp and you can store it for the next day. And Michael doesn't like dressing. So dressing means you can put it on if you like it. Same thing, Michael would be looking at the table, so would his children, and Michael would say, where are the potatoes? And I'd say, almost ready. And he does not like potatoes that they're not cooked properly, so they accept that. And then when I see the salad's half gone maybe, oh, I'll bring the potatoes, the lentils, whatever it is. And everyone relaxes. Do you know, Michael said that years later he never realised what I was doing. I was training the new family into eating more raw food. So vegetables, they may be baked, steamed, stir-fried. Michael loves potatoes, so every single day for lunch we have baked potatoes. And also a protein. So that protein may be something with lentils or chickpeas or lima beans. In my book, Self-Heal by Design, I have recipes at the back, and all the recipes are legumes, because I find that that's one area that many people don't know. What do you do with lentils? What do you do with chickpeas? My first cookbook was not Lebanese, but Lebanese have great ways to do legumes, because those little countries, they never had the land to graze the cattle, so that traditionally a lot of their protein came in through the legumes. But my first cookbook was an Indian vegetarian cookbook, and they certainly know how to cook their legumes. So when I was in Punjab, in India, a few years ago now, I was there for 5 days, and they said, what do we feed you? And I said, dal, just give me dal, twice a day. So breakfast was about 9 and lunch was about 3. And so I had 10 dal meals, no two the same. Different flavours, different legumes. They certainly know how to cook legumes. So that's one way to get to know legumes, is an Indian vegetarian cookbook. And it doesn't have to be hot. And after the meal, I think a great dessert is nuts. Maybe cashews one day, maybe walnuts another day. So remember, our 3 essential food groups is fibre and protein and fat. And both of these meal plans are well supplied with fibre, protein and fats. So it's supplying the 3 essential food groups. Sometimes we might have rice. Sometimes we might have quinoa. It all depends what was had for breakfast. So sometimes we would do that. But Michael and I probably get most of our carbohydrates from the root vegetables, potatoes, sweet potatoes. We have a lot of those. And sometimes I might do especially if the grandchildren are there, I might do a pasta dish. But if I do a pasta dish, there's always salad, there's always vegetables, and there's always some sort of protein as well.
Now, with the rice, do you have to soak it like you do the other grains?
No,
Okay.
no. The only one that really needs a lot of rinsing before you cook it is the quinoa. I probably rinse that 6 times before I cook that. It's bitter if you don't. And also, the lectins are rinsed away because it is a high lectin food, the quinoa. But if it's very well rinsed, but you can try it yourself, just cook it one day and the next day, rinse it 6 times and cook it. You'll see a great big difference.
On the lectin thing, when you soak beans, do you do the soaking of beans when you do like pintos or something, you dry beans?
Yeah.
You said something the other day about bring them to a boil, change the water, and then slow cook. Can Instant Pot, like pressure cooking, work instead of slow cooking?
In his book, The Plant Paradox, Dr. Stephen Gundren said pressure cooking totally eliminates lectins.
Oh, it does?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
So that's good news. But what I do with the pressure cooker, you bring it to you've soaked them, you've rinsed them. You bring it to the boil and rinse it well. You watch when you bring it to the boil, there's all that white fluff. You've got to get rid of that. Because once it's pressure cooked, the beans are breaking up a little bit. So if you rinse it, then you'll lose half your beans. Especially with lima beans, they really start to break up.
So actually, you boil it for a short amount of time. When you see all that stuff, you take it out and rinse it again?
Yeah. I actually put it in the sink and put the tap on it. And then all that white fluff overflows on the side, because if you put it in a strainer, it all gets mixed up with all that white fluff. So I didn't even know what a legume was till I was 20. But now I have, as a rule, I have legumes every meal. I have usually that for breakfast. This is Michael's and my most common breakfast. That's what we have every day. If children are introduced to this food, as soon as they've got their molars and they just eat it. But if you give a child a sweet sugar biscuit and then give them some pineapple, there's no way they're going to want that pineapple. Have you ever eaten some pineapple after a sweet sugar biscuit? So I never gave my children sweets. But at least twice a week I would do a dessert. So what would I do for the dessert? Often I just get the Common Sense Cookery book, which is the one I'd had since I was at school, and I'd just replace the wheat with spelt. I'd replace the sugar with honey. I'd replace the butter with olive oil. Often I'd just do that. But there are some delicious desserts healthy desserts that you can make. My husband loves apple pie. And ladies, you have to keep your husband happy. So I usually make an apple pie once a week. To make the apple pie, I do ladies, if you talk, you'll miss it. And this is the pastry that I would do. I do 1 cup of wholemeal spelt, 1 cup of white spelt. You see, the white spelt lightens it. You make food too heavy, no one's going to want to eat it. And 1/2 cup of water and 1/2 cup of olive oil and a pinch of salt. That's my pastry recipe. And then I roll it out thin, I bake it for 10 minutes. I stew the apples in just a little bit of water, and just when I turn the heat off, I put some raisins in, and that will sweeten it. And my husband loves raisins in the apple pie. And then I put that hot mix into the hot pastry that's had 10 minutes cook, and then I roll the top, squeeze the edges, put some knives, some holes in, and bake it. Delicious apple pie. And there's no sweetening in there other than the apples and the raisins. And I always use Granny Smith apples. So the children, of course, love dessert. And they can have dessert when they've eaten their lunch. There's another thing that I do that the children love, and that is raisin crackers. I'm very famous with all the grandchildren for raisin crackers. So it's very disappointing if they come and stay at my house and there's no raisin crackers. And that same dough that I just told you, I do 2 lumps of dough, roll it out to about this big, and flood it with, well, we call it raisins, but what we call sultanas, you call raisins. So that's what we call sultanas, those little ones, whereas raisins are bigger. Of course, the sultanas are little tiny grapes, whereas the raisins are bigger, red grapes dried. I don't even know if you can get them here, but what I do is that little rolled out bit I flood with the raisins, and then I put the other bit of dough on top, and then I roll it till it's really thin. So you see it's pastry with bits of raisins in it. Put it in the pan, score it and bake it. Oh, they just love that. There's no sweetening at all in that. So when Sonny had a birthday way out at Misty Mountain, and of course there's no shops there, I made a whole batch of raisin crackers for him. Oh, he thought that was the most wonderful birthday present he'd ever had. But I first made the raisin crackers, you know, when Michael and I would travel, because we had all these children, and it was just very easy. Everyone could have a few raisin crackers, a few pieces of fruit and some nuts. That was just a quick meal when we were travelling. Because the raisin crackers, they're like a flatbread, but it's got the raisins. I read about it somewhere and I made it, and now I make it all the time. And my granddaughter, who stayed with us, she's 17 now, my daughter said, oh, she's in the kitchen making raisin crackers. And I found that my children never asked for or inquired about or wanted, when we go to the shops, the sweet things, because they were so well fed. And we were having dessert a couple of times a week. Some people think dessert is not healthy. You can get some very nice desserts. So I think it was at Sacramento last week, they said, and we're not having dessert. I said, oh, why not? They said, because it's not healthy. I said, you can get some very healthy desserts. And you make some very nice desserts with chia seed. And you just Google vegan frozen cheesecakes. Amazing recipes. And Google chia desserts, because chia goes jelly-like. So I think one of our recipes is mix it with soy milk and then some coconut milk and pineapple blended up, grated lemon rind, bit of maple syrup. Oh, that's delicious. So you can put that in little jars, just to let you know that there's so much you can do that is healthy, because if you make the food boring and never ever serve anything sweet, as soon as the children are able, they're going to go and buy the junk. Food should be delicious. I remember my daughter Jessica, when she was 14, her girlfriend was eating lunch with us, and she said, if my mum's salad tasted like this, I'd eat it. So that's interesting, isn't it? You've got to make the food taste fantastic. God gave us taste buds for a reason. And how often is it, the food tastes fantastic, but it's killing you? Or the food is really good for you, but oh, it's so boring. So when my children, and I used to get them into the kitchen early, and from 8 they could start to do the meal, because we had so many children and we were homeschooled. Each child had a turn at cooking lunch. So they would make the menu, and it would of course be within reason. If we had lots of cauliflowers in the garden, then something cauliflower had to be in the menu, but they could choose cauliflower salad, cauliflower au gratin, baked cauliflower, cauliflower mornay, you know, whatever. Curried cauliflower, they could choose that. So I'd look over the menu with them and say, yeah, looks great. So again, it's encouraging them to be independent. Now I remember when Peter was only about 6, he wanted to cook. And so I put Jessica with him, and Jessica was about 12. And when the meal came, because he loved porridge, it was porridge with comfrey leaves in it. Peter thought comfrey was wonderful. Anyway, we all had a giggle about that, and there were other things that we could eat. But that's how they start. That's how they start. you work with them and their choices. So what would I do for birthdays? Well, for a birthday, the child whose birthday it was, they could choose the whole meal. You know, and they might, have you heard of haystacks, putting corn chips and then the kidney beans? They love that, and then pile all the salad on top. But the birthday cake, I would make waffles. And you can make some really nice healthy waffles. We do a soaked chickpea and millet waffle. So that was really nice. Put the waffle down, put some fruit jam on top, and then some nut cream, and then strawberries, kiwi fruit, pile it up. You can get it this high. Nice big cake. Put it in the fridge and let it set for a few hours. Magnificent cake. And yet there's no sugar in it. There's nothing nasty in that. Because one lady said, oh, but for birthdays, birthday cake. Not necessarily. I never did it. We never did sugar. In fact, my children's father used to buy sugar to put in his cups of tea. And my children, the adolescents, they'd draw skull and crossbones on the packet of sugar. I didn't tell them to do that. They just did it. And I think it's important to be reasonable. To be reasonable, not too absolute or not too, you give a little bit. I remember one night I was putting Lennox, who was 3, and Sophia to bed. And Sophia saw a torch. Yeah, you call it a flashlight? And she said, oh, Nana, can I have the torch so that if I have to get up in the night, I can go to the toilet? So what do I immediately look at? Lennox, what does he want? He wants one too. And I know if he has one, he's just going to put the flashlight on and off and on and off and hardly ever go to sleep. So I said, no, we're not going to have flashlights. You smile? And it's very good to get your children used to no. Very good. Because there's lots of no's in life. So we're not going to have the flashlights tonight. And then I saw Lennox stamp into the bedroom, throw himself on the ground, start crying. So it's a bunk bed, 2 bunks. So I just ignore that. Take little Sophia in, she puts her up in the bunk and say a prayer with her, say good night. Come down and Lennox is still on the floor, the crying has settled down. So I just left him and I thought, I think I have to rescue him. Sometimes you have to rescue them. They can get themselves into such a knot. So how do I rescue my little grandson? How do I get him up into bed? So I got on my hands and knees and I said, I'm a bulldozer. And I pushed the door open with my head and he stopped crying and looked. I just had my head down. I said, I'm a bulldozer, and I started pushing him with my head. And I started to wrestle him. I'm a bulldozer. And he started to giggle. He started to laugh. And I wrestled him. Boys love wrestling. You know what you do when you wrestle them? You're firm. You're massaging their muscles. You're firm. You don't hurt them, of course, but rolled him round and tipped him up on the bed and put him under the blankets, and he was smiling, and I kissed him goodnight and said a prayer for him. Now, he didn't get what he wanted because you never give them what they cry for. Because if you do, you're just setting the stage where every time they want something, they're going to cry. He didn't get what he wanted, so he, had a little performance in there. But I could see he needed help to get out of that. And that's how I got him out of that. And sometimes you'll find that. Distraction is a great thing, but consequence of action is the very best way to teach children. When I studied psychiatric nursing, I learnt there are 3 things that children you can have a battle with. And so these are the 3 things I decided I would do everything impossible not to have a battle with these 3 areas. 1 is food, 1 is toilet, and 1 is bed. And as you'll see on Saturday afternoon, the front part of our brain is foresight. We see ahead, whereas their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed till they're almost 30. So you think ahead, and you can predict what they're going to do, can't you? You can read them like a book. You know what's ahead, so you take steps, and you can prevent so many altercations if you make sure they're well fed, well watered, and they're to bed on time. Often it's when children get naughty and get very upset when they're hungry, when they're thirsty. Or with Lennox, he didn't want to go to the toilet. He wanted to play, and you'd see him like this. And if I'd say to him, Lennox, do you need to go to the bathroom? No. So you know what I'd say? Hey, Lennox, do you want to do a wee on the front veranda or the back veranda? He'd go, because he had a choice. And so that's how we did it. So when my big granddaughter, who's 14, she minded him when I gave a lecture for a couple of hours. I said, when he goes like that, you don't ask him if he wants to go, and they were out in the bush. She'd say, do you want to go on that tree or that tree? Remember, I raised his father. So again, it's just working with them. And I remember one day, he must have, because he leaves it to the last minute and then, goes everywhere and all over the shorts. And he went into the bedroom and he came out with clean shorts. So I know that he's a bit, he's nearly 5 now, so he's a bit embarrassed. So you just go in and you say, you got clean shorts. Where'd you put the wet ones? We'll put it in the bin. The tub. And then he goes and puts it in, and I never say a word. Now, the fact is, he leaves it too late, but what are you going to do about that? You just have to keep your eye on that. So it's just also seeing that they're children, raising them, but where there's an absolute really is disobedience. So they must be taught from a young age to do exactly what you say. And if you call, they come. That's very, very important. So I used to have a call, and it's the Australian call, so I'll give it to you. It's coo-wee. I didn't do it as loud as I can. It's coo-wee. I don't know if you've heard of the coo-wee call. So at home, if it was lunchtime and I can't find any children, now isn't that interesting? When they were homeschooling, we have our main meal at 2, and that allowed them to do all their school before lunch, which they loved. I haven't fed them since 7:30, and where are they? Somewhere in the bush. In other words, this has kept them going. They're not around my ankles. That's why I say it's easy parenting when you feed them well. So I'd coo-ee, and they knew that the rule was you must answer. Yeah. And within a few minutes, they're all on the veranda. So I was in the supermarket one day, and there was one kid looking at the Lego over there and another kid over there, and I had to go. So I coo-eed, and they all came. So it's just training from a young age, and if they don't come, you follow it through immediately. You follow them and you say, when Mummy calls, you must come, and eye to eye. And you get down level with them, eye to eye. You must come. You must come when I call. So it takes time to follow it through, but, the results are a lot easier parenting. So nothing takes the time. In fact, we've put this here a few times, but absolutely in parenting. And the younger you start, the better. And I found that the children were very happy with the guidelines. And then what I found is that the older children were doing it with the younger children. So James was about 8 years older than the 2 little boys, because I had Emma, James, then 2 girls, and then the 2 little boys. And he had Lego, and he had light and sound Lego. Now that was pretty fancy in the, what are we looking at, in the late 80s. And the little boys were not allowed to touch. This is James' rules. And so James would be on the carpet square playing with Lego, and the little boys were allowed to watch. They were 3 and 5. And they'd sit on the edge, and it was such an honour they could watch. That's all, just watch. And so James would be making it, and James would get something and it flicked this bit of Lego, because I saw this, bit of Lego went over on the floor. Well, the little boy picked it up and said, "Here, James." Here, James. He's like, so happy that he could touch that little bit of Lego. Do you know, it's very good for them. It's very good for them to have those guidelines. And if ever any of the children, you've got Lego here, haven't you? And Lego's wonderful for boys. They create incredible things. So if ever the big boy, say, did a Lego thing, so now we're a bit older now and the little boys have Lego too, and it's quite a remarkable piece of equipment, then that goes up high and no one can touch that. So you respect very much, you know, what the children have done. So, and I've seen some homes where the big boys made it and the little boys come along and wreck it, and you know what the parents say? Share. The Bible says, don't stir up anger in your children. And what you've just, this bigger boy, he spent so much time on that, and little boys come and they just wreck it and run away laughing. That's wrong. That should never happen. And if ever that happened, I would immediately get the little boys and say, you must never do that. Now you apologise to James. You apologise for wrecking his thing, and because you've wrecked his thing, you cannot play with Lego for 24 hours. Something like that. There must be a consequence. There's always a consequence. And never, ever could they answer back. That you must make those rules. Never, ever is that allowed to be. And if they... I'll tell you the story of my sister. Remember the ballerina? The very gracious lady. She had 2 boys, 2 girls. She had a boy, 2 girls and a boy. And her eldest boy, his name was Keegan. She said, Keegan answered me back once. Once. So the consequences were such that that boy quickly learned you don't do that. So sometimes they'll try things. Remember what Michael said about the electric fence? Every now and then the cows touch it to see if it's still on. Don't disappoint them. And also, your word is law. What you say, that must happen. And so sometimes the children say, Mum, can we go swimming? Sorry kids, we can't go swimming today because we've got this, this and this on. It's all right, we probably can do it tomorrow because, you know, the cabbages have to be put in the garden and the this and that. You know, sometimes I'll be a little bit like that, but you just ignore that, they'll get over it. If they make too much of a fuss, I would say, well, if this behaviour continues, it looks like you won't be able to swim tomorrow either. And that'll often snap them out of that really quickly. So let's say the neighbours visit. The neighbours visit and all their kids and a hot day, so you might change your mind, and you can. And you might say to the kids, look, we did say no swimming today, but you got the cabbages in the garden really quickly and the neighbourhood kids are here, so I reckon we could swim today. Oh yes, they're very happy with that. And sometimes you give a little. You give a little bit. And because you're the rule maker, for certain things you might be able to do that. But I found children very comfortable and very happy in the guidelines, but it's very important that parents be reasonable. And I found that children have a clear sense of right and wrong, of justice. And also, all the children must always be treated the same. So my son Peter, probably because he was such a sick child and I held him such a lot and had so much time with him till he was over his asthma, he said to me when he was about 16, he said, Mum, I'm the favourite son, aren't I? And I said, you are the favourite son, and William's the favourite son, and James is the favourite son. Mum! He'd go like that, because I wanted them clearly to know that they were all the same. And one girl said to me she had 4 elder brothers. And these brothers were all similar in age, you know, 15, 18, 2 years apart. And then the parents had a 5-year break and had a little girl. And I said, oh, your parents and your brothers must have loved having that little girl. She said they did. She said, I was very spoilt. She said, I didn't have to work. I didn't have to do what the boys did. I was very indulged, and as soon as my parents' back were turned, my brothers gave me hell. Now, how did that happen? Who started that? Whose fault is that? It's the parents' fault. Absolutely, it's the parents' fault. Now, I also recognise that there are jobs that boys are better at than girls, but all my boys could sew a button on. They could sew up a tear. All my boys could cook. And all my girls could chop wood, because we were out in the rainforest, we didn't have electricity, so they're all very good at chopping wood. And the girls could do what the boys could do, but predominantly the boys did the wood chopping. But predominantly the girls did this. But they all had those skills. So when they leave home, what your aim is, you've got self-sufficient kids. But what we've got today is something that I did not have, and that is technology. That is the phones. So there must be rules in the phones. Ideally, not in the bedroom. And if parents say, but they bought them themselves, I say, oh, well, I'm glad they bought them themselves, but it's your home and there must be rules. And it's so easy to keep the child quiet, to give them the phone. And some people are so proud that their little 2-year-old can scroll, can tap. Don't be proud, they're all smart. But the Russians are very keen and strict to keep strong and healthy, so they have incredible guidelines on technology on children. Did you know that? The Russian guidelines are under the age of 2, no exposure. Under the age of 5, maybe 5 minutes a day. Under the age of 10, maybe half an hour a day. By the age of 15, maybe 3 hours a day. You see what's happening here? It's very little exposure because the brains of children are developing and the skull is not as thick as adults. And so that technology does more damage to that thin developing skull compared to adult. So be very, very cautious on that. One lady said to me, my little girl's 7 and she can have 1 hour every Sunday. But she said, as soon as my back's turned, she's on the phone. I said, it's very easy. Every time she touches that phone, she loses 5 minutes next Sunday. And then maybe by Sunday, she's lost the lot. And then on Sunday, but I can have it. You say, that's right, sweetheart, but do you remember the rules? Every time you pick that phone up, you've just lost 5 minutes. And actually, you've lost half of next Sundays too. And if there's a throwing on the ground and a performance, looks like you're going to lose the next month's Sundays. Can you see that there must always be consequences? And tantrums can be healed very quickly with a bucket of cold water. Now, if I had a child tantruming here, I don't want to throw the cold water on them and mess up the carpet. And you never rough with a child. You are never rough. You're firm, like when you wrestle with the boy, but you're never rough. So you pick up the child, just put them out on the step there, then the bucket of cold water goes there. And the child goes, that was cold. And you say, yes, you were getting a little bit hot under the collar. I just thought I'd cool you down. Can you see you're not angry? When you're angry, when you yell, that hurts a child. But a bucket of cold water is a wonderful tonic. And then you get the child to change, then you get them to wring the clothes out, and then they hang them out to dry and change their clothes. But the whole time, you keep calm. That's very powerful. If ever you feel yourself getting irritated, go and jump on the trampoline for 5 minutes, come back, try again. Yes?
Oh, I want to share a story right after that one. We were watching 3 children that weren't ours. We didn't have any children at the time, and the parents went to the GC, wherever it was, Louisiana, wherever it was. And so the parents said, oh, they eat lots of oatmeal, and they eat squashes and all this. So I made some squashes, and the little boy just really didn't want to eat it. And he says, oh, I'm sick, and he fainted on the floor, but it was all fake. And so I grabbed a bottle of water, it wasn't cold, and I went, shh, I don't want you to be sick, and I don't want want you to be fainting, so I put water, but it was just a little bit, you know. And he was so shocked, and so were the other kids. And I says, now, I wanted you to get well. And so they got up and they started eating, but I took the zucchini, because they didn't want to eat it, and I made pudding out of it and didn't tell them what it was. And it was nice with honey in it. And I gave it to them, and they kept asking for more. And afterwards, I told them it was.
So for the sake of the camera, it's a story similar to what I gave. And also, they wouldn't eat the squash, so you put some honey and made some pudding and they ate all the squash. That's right. Now, notice how they act. So can we. So can we. But they're simple rules, and if you'd like to explore a little bit more, the book Have a New Kid by Friday by Keith Lehman, he's a Christian writer, but even my atheist sister liked the book because it's not overly Christian, but he basically just shows cause and effect. And at the end of every chapter, there's the testimony of 3 or 4 people that said, I got a new kid by Friday. Meaning that we just change the way we're reacting or dealing with the child, and that's when their behaviour begins to change.
What's the author's name again?
Keith Lehman, Leeman, I think it is. He's got another book called Have a New Teenager by Friday. Got another book, Have a New Self by Friday. Got another book, Have a New Husband by Friday. A lady was reading that book and she threw it down. She said, "Stupid book, all it's doing is talking about me." Exactly, it's all the way we respond or react. So at any point, if you're feeling quite bad now because you think, I've done everything wrong, I've got a good news, you can have a new kid by Friday. Things can change and things can turn around. That's the good news. I'll say a closing prayer before we have our break. Father, thank you so much for these simple guidelines on how to raise children. And we pray that you will give us wisdom and understanding as we endeavour to implement them. And we pray it in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.